This is the Mindy
and Carl
on Money podcast.
Today we're speaking with J.L. Collins, author of The Simple Path to Wealth, Pathfinders, and How I Lost Money in Real Estate Before It Was Fashionable.
Of course, we'll talk about books. We could not pass up that opportunity.
In a crazy turn of events, we'll also be talking about his butt.
That voice.
It's a little bit deeper than that. Speak in the J.L. Collins voice.
That voice.
I can't do it either, so I'm not going to even try.
But you make me try?
Sure. We're also going to talk about sabbaticals.
His first job, selling flyswatters door to door.
In short, this is the J.L. Collins interview that you have not heard before.
So if you're a J.L. Collins fan, stay tuned.
And since we're talking about books in this episode, today's show is sponsored by books, our favorites to be exact. Go to mindyonmoney.com/books to see which books we like and why.
That's mindyonmoney.com/books. All right, let's jump into the show.
So I have a pretty embarrassing story to tell, and it involves you, JL. But before we get into that, Mindy's laughing already, and she's involved in this story.
How am I involved in this story?
You'll know when I tell it. Before we get into that, JL, let's go deep. How do you want to be remembered?
Oh, I'd much rather hear your story.
In a moment.
It involves your butt.
It involves my butt?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Well, not now I don't want to hear this story. I don't think anybody else should ever hear this story either. So I hate that question that you're asking because first of all, I don't particularly care how I'm remembered. I'll be dead and gone and, who cares? I will make a prediction. I will most likely be remembered for having been the first guest on your new podcast. That will be my claim to fame. But other than that, I have no idea.
What do you think JL will be remembered for?
I like the brown nosing aspect of that answer, so I'm going to say being the first guest on the Mindy on Money podcast.
There you go.
I mean, he also wrote a couple of books, three books so far?
So far, 3 books.
Okay.
I'm going to say that I think JL will be remembered for changing a lot of lives. His book, The Simple Path to Wealth, taught so many people about FI and how to invest properly. Just reading Pathfinders, which we'll talk about in the next episode, you could see he's touched lives all over the world. Yeah, brown nosing, but I think that's what you'll be remembered for, JL.
Well, on a more serious vein, I think that's probably right. And I'm uncomfortable with that because it just feels so surreal to me. But I do have people, telling me almost every day how profoundly my work has changed their lives for the better. And that's stunning to me. First, it's just, I never anticipated that would be the case. And it's pretty humbling. And obviously it's gratifying to hear. So I'm sure that the serious answer to the question is that's what I'll be remembered for, and probably primarily as the author for The Simple Path to Wealth, because of my 3 books, at least so far, that one is far and away been the bestseller, and it continues to stay at the top of the Amazon charts. So it looks like it's gonna be around for a while. So yeah, that's probably the legacy I'll leave behind.
Awesome. And we have a link to it. If you go to mindyonmoney.com/books, there's a link to Simple Path to Wealth and JL's other 2 books.
Okay, this is too morbid. Let's talk about his butt.
Yeah, I don't like that question either because it's talking about your death and what happens after.
I'd rather talk about my death than my ass.
But it's a family show. Stop, just get on with it.
So I'd like to talk about the first time we met you, and I'll back up a second because it's actually more like the first time I saw you. It was at FinCon, and I knew you were going to be there, but we had never met you or talked to you. And I'm shy, and I was super shy back then. So Mindy and I were coming up an escalator, and I see you. I knew it was you. I think I kind of saw the side of your head. You were talking to someone else, and I think I said something like, "Oh, wow, look at that. It's JL. It's JL. I got to take his picture." But I was too embarrassed or shy to ask you for like a selfie or something like that. So I got out my phone camera and I took a picture of you talking to this other person. And I mostly got your backside in the picture, but that was my first experience with you.
So do you have this framed on your wall somewhere?
We were going to put it behind us today, but the picture didn't come in time.
I like the picture that is behind you.
We had to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go to take this picture of the bull where there's nobody behind, like nobody surrounding it. I don't know if you've ever been to the actual bull in New York City.
I have not, but I've seen, obviously, it's very well photographed.
It is swarmed by people all the time at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
So we got up super early and took that photo, but I will not put a photo of your butt up there.
Are you saying I don't have a cute butt? Is that what we're hearing here?
Wow. Don't insult our first guest.
That's not what I said at all. JL, am I a stalker? Does that photo make me a stalker, or is there going to be a restraining order after this recording?
I think this whole conversation is putting you in the stalker category.
What I remember from that conference is JL Collins has this super deep Darth Vader voice, right? And I had lost my voice on the way to that conference, and it was starting to come back, but I sounded like Minnie Mouse. And nobody at this conference had ever met me before. So here's me with this horrible Minnie Mouse voice talking to Darth Vader himself. And I'm like, wow, I feel like such a moron talking. I'm just not going to say a word.
Mindy, I am your father. Actually, I have kind of a funny FinCon story around my voice. I forget which FinCon it was, but this would have been back in, 2013, 14, 15, in that range. And J.D. Roth at the time was doing the Master of Ceremonies job. And he came up to me and he said, I'm doing these asking people to do these little 5-minute segments before the actual speakers. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to do one of those and tell the origin story of your blog. And I said, sure, I'd be happy to. And I think this was in the morning, and this was going to be after lunch. So it was the first speaker after lunch, and I was going to go on 5 minutes before that. Well, as you know, at FinCon, you're talking all the time, and it puts a real stress on your voice. So later that morning, I'm sitting in one of the breakout sessions watching that speaker. And all of a sudden I realized that I've completely lost my voice. And I'm maybe 2 hours from the 1 o'clock when I'm supposed to do up this 5-minute thing. And I mean, I completely lost it. That's never happened to me before or since. So I walked out of this particular talk, and I went up to my room, and I didn't have any lozenges or anything, but I'm gargling. And finally I got my voice back enough that I could barely croak out a little bit like this, right? So I hear, well, it is what it is, but I think I can get through the 5 minutes. So I go into the auditorium where the big talks are given, and I'm sitting in the front because I know JD is going to call me up, and I'm hoping that I have enough of this croaky voice to get through. And JD goes to the microphone to introduce me. And the way he introduces me is to go on at great length about my wonderful voice. It's going to be for everybody to hear my wonderful voice. No matter what I said, he just went on and on and on. And so I come up the little steps onto the stage and over to the podium, and we shake hands, and well, they got to hear something different.
That JD Roth is full of beep.
Well, of course, he didn't know. I mean, in fairness to JD, he had no idea that between the time he asked me in the morning and the time he invited me on the stage that this had happened.
So, man, you're going to have PTSD as a result of this FinCon. Me photographing your backside, JD Roth.
This is why I don't go to FinCon anymore.
Oh, man. Okay, let's get into some serious questions. Is there such a thing as a born saver?
Wow, that's actually is a serious and a pretty interesting question. And one that I've thought about, not so much as the saver part, but is somebody born to be naturally inclined to be good with money? And my own experiences, I remember from a very small child saving money. And I know my parents encouraged that, but I don't remember needing the encouragement. When I was about 5 or 6, my dad was a manufacturer's rep, and he sold housewares. And for instance, at one point, he had a line of aluminum furniture, and he'd have samples of these things to take around to his customers. And at the end of the season, the manufacturer would come out with a new line for the following season, and my dad would give the aluminum furniture to my mother, who would then sell it, on the local, in those days, in the local paper. She'd run ads to sell the stuff. Well, at one point, he had a line of fly swatters, little handheld fly swatters. And when that season was over, these were low dollar or low price things, and my mother wasn't interested in trying to sell those, so he gave them to me. And I went around selling them for a nickel. I went around door to door. I don't think people let their kids do this anymore, but in those days, and I was like 5 or 6. I went around door to door selling these things. It's amazing to me how many people said no, because I think I was a moderately cute kid. I mean, and I guess the nickel was more money then than it is now. But anyway, some people said yes, and I remember how thrilling it was to earn that money, and how gratifying it was to save those nickels. So yeah, I think I was probably pretty close to a natural born saver. But there you go.
Yeah, I've thought about it too, and I think saver is too specific of a thing. But in my case, I think I was, I'm not sure what it was. Maybe a little bit insecure. I just loved money, so I would go door to door trying to shovel driveways and all that kind of stuff too. And my siblings had no interest in those things, and I'm not sure why. Just I know I was born with something different. To say it's a saver is probably the wrong word, but definitely some quality that caused me to want to earn and hoard money.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
don't
I
like the
don't know.
word hoard, but
It's apropos here.
yeah,
Uh,
I mean, I think there is that. I always had the drive to earn money as well, and when I was in high school, I went out for the football team freshman year, and I liked that I'm a pretty big guy, and I was a big kid, and I liked it well enough, but I also was at the age where I could get a part-time job, and working was just much more appealing to me. It had the same kind of camaraderie with as being on a team did, but they paid me, and 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 the football team didn't pay me. I guess nowadays, if you're good enough, they do pay you, but in those days, so it was kind of a no-brainer for me. I mean, I liked earning money. I've always liked getting paid.
And the lack of brain trauma is pretty good too.
Hang on a second, guys. Somebody just came to the door, so there's going to be a little interruption here.
Maybe they're selling fly swatters. So, JL, is your illustrious experience as a fly swatter salesman your first money memory?
Yeah, actually, it is. I mean, it was the first time I earned money, and again, I'm like 5 or 6 years old, and yeah, so that would be my first money memory. I didn't get an allowance or anything, and particularly, I never got an allowance, not at that age.
And did you use your vast earnings to buy anything, or did you really just save it all?
I don't remember spending it, so I'm going to guess I saved it. I remember I liked saving it, and I liked watching it grow. The spending memory I have is there was one day I was out as a kid, and I was probably maybe 6 or 7, 8, somewhere in that range, and I found a $5 bill on the street. And that was huge in those days. I mean, I'm going to date myself as a geezer I am, but this would have been in like 55, 57. in that age range. So $5 was a lot of money. And I was thrilled. And I promptly went to the local toy store and to spend it. And literally, it was so much money, I couldn't spend it all. I couldn't figure out enough things to buy with it. That's how far $5. It was probably like finding $50 today, which for a kid that age, you can just imagine. And then, so I bought all this stuff. I was thrilled. I still probably had, $1.98 left or something. And I went back and that was when I told my parents, because I brought all this stuff and I was very excited. And then I got the bad news. They said, well, we have to try to find out who that money belongs to, and you're going to have to give it back. And, I was horrified because, of course, I'd spent a big portion of it. I didn't have a lot of it to give back. And I don't know how my parents went about trying to find the rightful owners, but they were unsuccessful, which was which was one of the great strokes of good fortune in my life. So, but that's the only spending memory I actually have of those days.
Did you drop this 20? Yeah, I did.
Besides those toys, what is something you have purchased that you regret?
By the way, if it had been $20 that I'd found instead of $5, I probably would have said, you know what, I'm FI. I'm done. I don't have to go to school anymore. There's going to be no work for me.
Fi at 5.
Yeah, our kid tried to do a similar play. She told us, hey, Dad, I want to be Phi. I'm like, okay, that's great. She's like, no, I don't think you understand. I'm like, well, what don't we understand? She's like, I'm done now. I'm done with school. I just want to be Phi right now. Like there's this little thing called education and work that has to happen in between and making the money and investing. So
And
she
she
didn't
said,
appreciate that part.
well, right. She said, Dad, you're uneducated and you don't work. So,
Yeah, great point. She was just following her role model, I guess.
yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I can't. To go back to your question, off the top of my head, I can't think of anything I really regret. I mean, I know there have been things that I've bought that, have been disappointing because they didn't turn out to be quite, as well made or as good as I thought they would be. I do, again, going back to childhood memories, I remember at one point when I was a kid, they were advertising on TV this fireboat toy. And they had all these great, action things, this fireboat and spraying water and blah, blah, blah. So I badgered my parents to tell Santa Claus that that's what I wanted for Christmas. And sure enough, under the tree, there was this fireboat. And that was a huge disappointment. It wasn't anything like it had been on the television ads, which was my first lesson that advertising lies, which is the lesson I tried to impart to my daughter immediately. So I guess that's probably the biggest memory I have along those lines. I guess I've been a more cautious shopper ever since.
Was the fireboat toy or the condo in Chicago a bigger regret?
Well, the condo in Chicago was certainly the more expensive mistake. And it was brutal going through it at the time, but it also gave me a great story to tell, which I actually tell in my second book, How I Lost Money in Real Estate Before It Was Fashionable. A very short book. It's a humorous tale because after decades, I can see the humor in it. But there are also a lot of very valuable lessons, I think, that are embedded in it. And I got a wonderful illustrator to illustrate it, to goes along with kind of the humorous, self-mocking theme of that book. So I did get that out of it. So I guess looking back, I don't actually regret the condo anymore. But at the time, it was making me suicidal.
Okay,
Yeah.
on the other side of that, what is the best thing or experience that you have purchased?
Well, probably my travel would fall into that category, and that's probably not what you're asking. I think you're asking for what thing like a car or a fireboat or something like that. And I've never been enamored of things in particular. We bought this little cottage on Lake Michigan that we call Cabanda 5, 6 years ago now, and we've really enjoyed that. And it was a bit of a disaster when we bought it, and we've had to put some money into it, but it turned out to be less of a disaster than I expected. So, because my expectations were so low, the surprises tended to be pleasant ones. So, I suppose that might be rank high in terms of things that have been great purchases.
In that case, though, I'd argue that you didn't purchase a thing; you purchased an experience. I see the photos you take of the lake at dawn, and I've had the pleasure of visiting you there and the privilege of visiting you. So I don't think you bought a thing. I think you bought an experience.
Well, the photos, the photo credits go to my wife, Jane. I never think to take pictures of anything. I never took pictures on my travels. I don't carry a camera. I guess we all carry a camera now with this, but I never remember that it has a camera. I'm just usually irritated that it's not good at making phone calls. So yeah, the photo credits go to Jane, and she's taken some stunning photographs there. And you're right. I mean, it is what makes it pleasurable is the experience of it, but that's true of anything. I think when you bought your sports car, your NSX, I mean, you're buying a thing, but it's the pleasure you get out of driving it. So yeah, I guess it's in many ways it's both.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Funny enough, the best experience I had with the NSX was I went to a meetup of other NSX owners and hung out with them because if you've got the car in common, you probably like to talk about cars and other similar stuff. So I remember at one point, all the cars were parked out front, and we were all standing in back the guy's backyard. We couldn't even see the cars, and we were talking about who knows what. So it wasn't the car that brought me happiness. It was the community around the car. And how funny that was. We couldn't even see the cars when that happened.
Now, see, I would have hoped that you would say your best experience was that car was when I went with you when you bought it.
But that's part of the community experience because and you didn't get to go visit with me. True story. That was in Wisconsin, but that was part of it too. I got to visit with you and come up and see you twice when I went to look at it and when I went to purchase it.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right in a roundabout sort of way.
I also think, though, that travel is a very valid answer to this what's the best thing you've purchased, because you enjoy traveling and it costs something to travel, and you can use your money to better your life. And if traveling betters your life, then that's the best thing that you've purchased.
And I think you're right about that, Mindy. And it's interesting too when I look at when our daughter was growing up. Uh, Fortunately, she was not a kid who was into designer clothes and that kind of stuff. Because I would have been very reluctant to spend money on that because I just don't see any value in it. She loved traveling from the get go. And she did a lot of it as a kid, which of course was not cheap. It probably would have been cheaper if she'd been into the designer clothes. But I never had any money. She said, Dad, I have this opportunity to go on this trip. The answer to that was always yes, because I saw value in it. And, in where I would not have seen value in spending it on different kinds of goods or what have you. And that seems a little weird to me because why would you be so liberal in spending money on your kid in one way and so reluctant in the other? But there you go. But we wound up with a very well traveled daughter who still loves to I remember when she was 12 years old, she said to me at one point, she said, Dad, it's so unfair. And I said, what's that? And she said, well, you've been more places than I have. I said, Jessica, you're 12. I've had decades to more time to travel. Yes. And of course, by the time she was in her mid 20s, she'd been more places than I have. So it didn't take her long to catch up.
Yeah, and she's been more places at 12 than most other 12-year-olds. She's been more
Probably,
places at 12 than most 25-year-olds.
probably, and that's because she was willing to forego the fancy clothes.
So you used the word values a couple of times. And on last week's episode, we talked about the concept of enough in terms of having enough money so that you can retire early. And one of the things that we put into the enough worksheet, the bonus worksheet for anybody who wanted to download it was, figuring out your values so that you could determine how much you wanted for your retirement. Do you have any words of advice for people who might be like struggling with figuring out what they truly value the most?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important question for people to ask, especially if they're trying to figure out how much they need to put the lifestyle they want together. I'm not sure I have any great advice on that subject. When I was on my journey, I wasn't even aware of the concept of financial independence. I just knew that I wanted to have what I thought of as FU money, which meant I had enough money to make bold decisions, to step away from work periodically. But I never thought about retiring early or not working at all. I mean, I enjoyed my career. I just didn't want to have to do it all the time. So, but yeah, if you're thinking about accumulating enough money that you're not going to work again, you definitely need to think about what kind of lifestyle you expect that money to support. And of course, I think the 4% rule is a great guideline to that. And it's a pretty simple formula. If you need $40,000 a year to live on for the lifestyle you want, you multiply that by 25, and that tells you how much you need to have invested. And of course, the answer to that is $1 million. The corollary of that is if you have $1 million invested and you're wondering, do I have enough? Well, you take 4% of that, that's going to be 40,000. And then you ask the question, is 40,000 enough for me to live on every year? And if it is, you're golden. If it's not, then either you need to adjust your living expenses or you need to keep working and building that $1 million portfolio.
That brings me to my next question. You did something that I think is really impressive, and I'll back up a second. When I was in college, I remember going to a career counselor and getting my resume together, and the counselor was like, well, when you start in the workforce, you never want to have any kind of gap in your resume because that's going to be a huge signal that you got fired or something went wrong in your career. So you need to find a job and you need to work until retirement. And now things have changed. It's more of a gig economy. People have short term jobs, and it's encouraged even to take time off or sabbaticals. But you, way back when, you did not have enough money, as you just mentioned, to quit. But you still took time off. I think your first job you took, I don't remember how much you had, maybe $5,000 or $10,000, which was a lot, but not nearly enough to retire. And you just quit.
With that. And at one point I decided, well, I'm going to go in and talk to my boss and see if I can negotiate maybe just going away for 4 months, because there was a really cheap airfare to get to Europe in those days that was a 4 month time horizon. You left on a certain day, you had to come back on a certain day. And they said no. And I didn't realize things were negotiable in those days, and they probably didn't. Had never been asked that kind of question by anyone, so it seemed out of the obvious answer was no. And I thought about that for a couple of weeks, and I went back and I said, well, as much as I love the job, and it took me 2 years out of college, by the way, to get this first professional job, and I really did like it, but I decided that I wanted to go to Europe, and so I went in and resigned. And it wasn't a negotiating ploy on my part. So I was stunned at the response. He said, well, why are you going to quit? And I said, well, I really want to do this trip to Europe for a year. He said, well, hang on, don't do anything rash. Let me talk to it was a small company. Let me talk to the owner. And, in a couple of days, they got back to me and they said, if you're willing to commit to coming back after 4 months, then we'll hold your job for you. They weren't going to pay me, of course, but so, that got me to Europe. And
I think that's an impressive mindset. That thought would have never crossed my mind to take time off. I'll tell you something pathetic, JL. This is super pathetic. From the time I started working to the time I retired, from the time I was FI, so it was like the age of 25 to when did I quit?
A
I don't
while
know,
ago.
like 43. I never took more than 1 week off of work, and I don't think I even considered taking more than a week off. So what you did is impressive, and I'm not sure if you have any other comments on that.
if I had to work until I was 40 and never took it more than a week off, I would have retired too if I'd been able. I think the thing that allowed me to have a lengthy career is I took these sabbaticals on a semi-regular basis whenever the spirit moved me. The shortest was 3 months, the longest was 5 years. And you're right, it created problems on the resume that I had to be a little bit creative because you couldn't just say, yeah, I was out fooling around traveling for a few months. That would not have been acceptable in those days.
Witness protection. I can't talk about
That's right.
it.
That's right.
JL, if you could give your 20-year-old self some advice, what would that be?
Well, this is going to sound a little self-serving, but I would have loved to have been able to hand my 20-year-old self the simple path to wealth, uh, because it took me decades to figure that out, and I was really wandering in the wilderness. And the truth is, it really is simple, and if you have the right mindset, it is really easy, and it's extraordinarily powerful in terms of the result that it gives you in your life. And so I spent a lot of those decades worrying about how this was going to all pan out, and I didn't have to worry. And especially if I'd known what I know now and what's in that book, I would have been in index because Jack Bogle coincidentally started the first index fund in 1975, which was the same year I first began investing. That's the same year I bought my first shares of stock. If I'd known about index funds, I mean, things would have been just so much easier and so much more powerful. And there would have been so much more direction. Again, wandering in the wilderness was, I guess, kind of fun in a way, but it also, and I didn't know anybody else who was doing what I was doing at the time. And so it was a lonely path, and I was filled with a lot of self-doubt about why isn't anybody else doing this? And there was no way in those days I'm sure there were other people doing it, but there was no internet. There weren't even personal computers in those days. So there was no way to connect with people outside of your immediate community. And there was nobody in that doing it. So, yeah, I mean, I would have loved to have. I hear from people who say, man, I wish I'd come across your book when I was 40 instead of 50 or 30 instead of 40 and I'm like, yeah, me too. Wish I'd had it before I had to write the thing when I was 65.
I don't think it's self-serving. I give your book to a lot of 20-year-olds.
Yeah, well, I hope some of them read it.
I hope so too. We do have a stack of them that we hand out. We've got a bunch of them on our bookshelf. I gave 2 of them away at our last summer party. I have to follow up with our neighbors and see if they read it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That would be really interesting to see if they read it.
But-
I just sent it to Brittany Reynolds, who is on TikTok at Brit_Reynolds, and she is on a debt payoff journey. She accumulated $36,000 in debt and decided, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to move out of my apartment in the Bay Area, move back home with my parents so that I can take all of the money that I'm making and throw it at my debt and wipe this out. And she doesn't really know anything about investing. And as we were talking on the Bigger Pockets Money podcast a few weeks ago, she was just so excited and genuine to learn about money. And she's really doing a great job with her money, paying off her debt, and she'll be debt free around June. So I sent her a copy of your book couple of days ago, just so she could start learning about investing. And, what I like about the book so much is that you wrote it for Jessica when she
Right.
was younger. So it's not filled with all of this. Oh God, what does this word mean? Now I have to go look it up. Oh, what does this phrase mean? I don't even understand this. Forget it. I'm done. It's geared towards, what was she, like 17 when you started writing these originally blog posts? I think she was
Yeah,
pretty young, right?
she was in college.
Oh, she was in college. Okay. But still, it's not geared towards people who are studying finance and know all the words, and it's geared towards somebody who doesn't know what they're doing.
She and I had, she came home from college one day, and I had managed to turn her off to all things financial by pushing it too soon and too hard. But that didn't stop me from continuing to push hard. And she came home from college one time, and I probably started into one of my financial lectures. And she stopped me and she said, Dad, I get it. I know this stuff is important. I just don't want to have to think about it all the time. And that was an epiphany for me, because in that moment, I realized that I'm the odd one out. And you guys, and probably a lot of people listening, are the odd ones out. We like this stuff. But most people, like my daughter, have better things to do with their life. And they're smart enough to know that if they get money right, their life will be much better. They'll have many more options available to them. They just don't want to have to obsess about it all the time. And so that's when I wrote The Simple Path to Wealth. It was written for my daughter, that's who she is, and for people like her, that they know that it's important. They just want to know, how can I do this simply and effectively, and then get on with my life doing the things that I really care about. And so that's who it's written for. And I think that's one of the reasons that it's resonated with so many people, is it's not a financial book written for people interested in financial books.
Yeah, I love it. JL, we're reaching the end of our episode. It is time for the most hard-hitting question we have for you. Are you ready?
Probably not, but that's not going to stop you.
No, it's not.
So, JL, we're both from Chicago, and Chicago is famous for pizza. And pizza has very polarizing opinions. Some people love the deep dish. Some people love the New York style. I definitely have an opinion on this. What is your answer? And remember, there is only one right answer, and I hope you get it correct.
Well, of course, I will give you the one true answer to that question. Thin crust, no question.
Did he say thin crust is the answer?
My heart is broken. Well, my heart's probably broken from the just pizza clogging up my arteries.
It's too bad you only learned this so late in life.
Oh,
But I remember when I was living in Chicago, I lived in Rogers Park, and there was a pizza place there that made at least what I thought in those days was terrific pizza. It was JB's was the name of it, and their thing was JB, free Coke with every pizza. And I probably ate half of my meals were JB pizzas that were delivered to the apartment.
And that was, would that have been the 80s? I'm just thinking of what kind of Coke you're talking about. I think you're talking about the drink.
Stop.
This is PG rated. I'll shut up.
It would have been in the 70s, and it would have been Coca-Cola.
Great. So next week, we're going to continue our conversation with JL about his new book, Pathfinders. So tune in for that. Thank you so much, JL, for your time today.
Hey, it's always fun hanging out with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Likewise.
Yes, this has been the Mindy
and Carl
on Money podcast with JL Collins, author of The Simple Path to Wealth, author of Pathfinders, author of How I Lost Money in Real Estate Before It Was Fashionable, and owner of The Wrong Opinion About Pizza. Deep dish for life. I was so good for so long.
Cut.
Did he say thin crust is the answer?